Hello, Peter Forson here as Cyrus, and welcome to my review of Atelier Ayesha, the Alchemist of Dusk. Well, having played Atelier Verona, Atelier Totori, and Atelier Meruru, it only made sense for me to get Atelier Ayesha to give my opinion on the game, since I immensely enjoyed the previous game in the series for being a pretty different type of RPGs from the usual RPGs that I played. I love how the story in the game have this slice of life vibe to it. Heck, I just love how the games have this overall slice of life vibe to it. I love the Alchemy System, and I just love the overall structure of the game. So the question is, did I enjoy this game as much as the other games in the series? Well, let's find out by reviewing the game. Atelier Ayesha, the Alchemist of Dusk, is an RPG with turn-based combat that is developed by Gust and published by Tecmo Koei. Yes, Tecmo Koei, not Nice of America. Why am I mentioning this specifically? Well, there are a few fans that I know that aren't really pleased with how Tecmo Koei did in terms of publishing for this game, but I'll talk about that when I get to it in my review. Anyway, Atelier Ayesha is available on the PS3 for retail and is also available for download on the PlayStation Network. Atelier Ayesha is also a standalone game for the Atelier series, meaning that it's not really connected to any other Atelier games in terms of story characters. Now, I'm not sure if the Atelier Ayesha is going to start a sub-series like Atelier Arland, but just know that this is a download game, so you don't really need to play the other games in order to play this game.
Listen, this is my fundamental philosophy. Truths are not something that can be passed around by others. You yourself must demand and grasp them. If you want to know the truth, then you must study and think on your own.
Visually, Atelier Ayesha looks pretty good for the most part. The character models, for both playable characters and enemy models, looks pretty good and improved from Atelier Meruru. Environments also look improved for the most part, and I have to say the towns in this game are a major step up from the past games. And the FMV that actually plays when you get into a new area, or a new unique area, is a really nice touch. And I just simply adore the art style in Atelier Ayesha. Visually, Atelier Ayesha probably got my favorite visuals of the PS3 Atelier games. The animation for Atelier Ayesha is decent as well. The battle animations are pretty good. Overall, I don't really have many problems with the animation for this game. Except for one thing, which is the lip sync. Well, it's not really lip sync and more that they got the character to continuously lip flap. Though this wasn't really limited to Atelier Ayesha since the other games had this problem, but it's just more noticeable here since there's no 2D character portrait popping up in this game. And Atelier Ayesha tries to animate the character speaking moments through the 3D character models. But besides that issue, I have no problem with the overall animation of the game. Story-wise, the game gets you to play as Ayesha Tugo, who is an apothecary living alone in the frontier, whose sister, Neo, seems to have vanished a few years ago. One day, while she was visiting Neo's grave in the ruin, which is located near her home, a sudden apparition of her sister suddenly appears before Ayesha's eyes, but just as quickly as the apparition appears, it disappears shortly after. While questioning if what she saw was a dream or not, an alchemist by the name of Heathcliff Hezeldine then appears in an attempt to examine the ruin, or more specifically the grave. He then reveals that the apparition that Ayesha saw was not a figment of her imagination, since he was able to see it too, and also revealed that Neo is possibly alive. But just as Ayesha tries to ask him about Neo's situation, he refuses and says that she should try finding out about Neo's situation herself. But before the alchemist leaves, he offers Ayesha two hints. The first is to learn the art of alchemy. The second is to learn all about the glowing flowers. He also reveals, to the player probably, and not to Ayesha, that Neo probably only has 3 years left for Ayesha to find her. And thus begins the journey of Ayesha in her attempt to find out what happened to her sister and trying to rescue her. Overall, I really like the story of Atelier Ayesha. It still retains the lighthearted feeling that the other Atelier games have, but it probably is as emotionally charged as the Atelier Totori's plot, which was probably the best story of the Atelier Arland series in my opinion, while having a better focus and probably paced out better. So all in all, Atelier Ayesha probably got my favorite story in terms of the Atelier PS3 games. The characters are also nice as well, I found most of the characters to be very likable, and I never found myself annoyed with them. Yeah, they do follow anime tropes, but I still find them incredibly likable for the most part. I probably like them as much as Atelier Verona original cast, which is saying something, since that game had my favorite cast of characters in the Atelier Arland games. Now we get to the part that fans of the series seem to take issue with, well, in terms of Tecmo Koei publishing, which is the voice acting. Not particularly the English voice acting, though I do hear some don't like it, but the lack of Japanese voice acting. But before I get to my overall opinion on the lack of Japanese voice acting, I'll talk about the English one. For the most part, I think they're decent to good. You have some pretty well-known English voice actors in here, such as Michelle Ruff voicing Marion, Wendy Lee voicing Regina, Carrie Savage voicing Marietta, and I do think they do a good enough job. The game even got some voice actor I never heard before, and that's kinda rare, like Erika Harlech voicing Ayesha, which I think she does an okay job. The ones that I think that did the best job is probably Carrie Savage's Marietta and Richard Ekbar Keithgriff. They really did a great job with their characters for this game in my honest opinion. There are a few flat deliveries, but overall, I didn't really have a problem with the voice acting or voice direction. The only problem that I have is that it's a partial dub, but then again, so is Atelier Verona to Meruru, so it's not really much of a problem for me. Now, to get to my take on Tecmo Koei not including the Japanese dub. Yes, it's disappointing that Atelier Ayesha doesn't have the Japanese dub, especially since A, that the Japanese dub of the Atelier games usually have more voice acting in general, in comparison to the partial English dub, and B, dual voice acting was always included in the Atelier games. But that's just it. It's unfortunate and disappointing, but it's totally not game breaking like how some of the more vocal fans are making it out to be. And I really think that some people that are actually boycotting the game just for that sole reason is really overreacting. Yeah, that's my take on the whole matter. So yeah. Anyway, next thing I'll be talking about is the soundtrack. And man, does this soundtrack rock! Seriously, I love this soundtrack in Atelier Ayesha. The soundtrack got like some really smoothing pieces to some really epic themes. To some even really unique tracks like Slag Dance. Again, it's unfortunate that Tecmo Koei didn't have a limited edition for Atelier Ayesha so that I could get a soundtrack CD for this game, like for the other games. My favorite track would probably be Slag Dance, Select Tokora, Artemis. Okay, honestly, I love most of the track in the game. So, yeah. Probably got my favorite soundtrack in the Atelier series. Overall, Atelier Ayesha probably got the best presentation for me. It got the best story, pretty good characters, and the visual looks pretty nice, and the soundtrack is awesome. Yeah, the Japanese dub is missing, and that is pretty disappointing by itself, but it's not really gonna break the game in my honest opinion.
Sharpen my heart. Become a blade to cut through all. Pierce through the sky, arrow of light. This battle is my victory.
Now, like with all my reviews of the Atelier games, first I talked about how the game is structured, then the combat system, and lastly the alchemy system. Like with the previous PS3 Atelier games, the game has a time system, which means you have to achieve certain objectives before certain dates. Doing actions like ingredient gathering, synthesizing, finding monsters, etc. will advance the eternal clock of the game. The objective of Atelier Ayesha is to find clues regarding about the glowing flowers and to learn about alchemy in order to save Neo, which you probably can do by just traveling around the frontier, going to town, interacting with the characters in the game, that sort of stuff. Structurally, it's more linear than Atelier Tutori and Meruru, in that you have fewer ways to do the list of objectives that is required to progress the story in comparison to Tutori and Meruru. where there were more ways to either increase adventure points or developing land, but it's also more story driven than the other games. I guess it's sort of similar to Atelier Verona, where you have a list of objectives you have to do in order to progress the story, but it's nowhere near as restrictive since A, you have to span 3 years to progress the story at your leisure, unlike Verona where you only have a couple of months to do an assignment, and B, there's really no set order for some of the story missions. But Atelier Ayesha still retains the story structure in the form of the memory point system, which I have now explained. As you progress through the story, you have the ability to write up the events that occur during the story parts or character events in the memory diary. By writing up these events in the memory diary, you will gain various bonuses that will help you get through the game. But in order to write up these events, you need memory points. In order to gain memory points, there are a variety of stuff you can do. For one, you can do search tasks for various areas, which consists of defeating all enemies in a certain area and collecting X amount of materials from that area. Also note that doing search tasks for various areas can open up paths to other areas. And every other stuff you can do to increase memory points is also do alchemy, do the various jobs throughout town, progress through the story. Heck, getting random flyers and talking to some NPCs will also earn you memory points, and etc. And that's the overall structure of Atelier Ayesha. I think the structure of the game works well. It is kinda more linear in comparison to Atelier Totori and Meruru, and it is a bit more ambiguous for the main story quest in comparison to them as well. Though you can get the overall guidelines for most of the tasks in the game by going to the note menu. But the game still offers you a good amount of freedom with how you can play with the memory point system, and it does still feel rewarding getting the memory points and using it to write memory entries in the diary. And I also do like how there's an emphasis on doing the main story quest and character events with the memory point system, since it does feel that the overlying story and character interaction feel more significant in comparison to the other games. Overall, I like the structure of Atelier Ayesha. It isn't as open as Atelier Totori and Meruru, but there is still a good amount of freedom in terms of how you can play. It still feels rewarding as well. Though I do probably like Atelier Meruru structure better than Atelier Ayesha, if I was to compare it. Time management overall is also very lenient in this game. Though I do have one nitpick, and that's got to do with the job requests in this game, or how it's handled. Well, it's pretty much handled the same way as you give items to the people and give you money and memory points. I take more issue with finding the job request, since, well, then the job request isn't really gathered in one area like the previous games, and it's really scattered about in the towns you go through. So it can feel a bit a pain to go through in comparison to other games, since you really only need to go to one area in comparison to the multiple areas in Ayesha. So yeah, but besides that issue, I don't really have much problem with the overall structure. Next thing I go into is the combat system. Like the previous games, Atelier Ayesha uses a turn-based combat system. In battle, you got your HP, MP, turn order list bar, move, skills, the assist bar, and special gauge. HP and MP is self-explanatory, while the turn order list / bar indicates the turn order of the battle, and you'll be able to manipulate the turn order by various actions. Using the move option allows you to move certain areas to a certain point in the field, which might give you a slight advantage over an enemy if you attack the backside. But do note that if you move your character too far, you might not be able to use a assist action. But also note that being too close can be disadvantage at times as well, since, well, if an enemy is going to do an area of effect attack, it might wipe out 2 party members at a time. So yeah, the assist bar pretty much works the same way as the other Atelier games, where doing certain actions will raise the assist meter, and you'll be able to do various actions when certain conditions is met, such as attacking with a character will prompt an assist attack from another character. When an enemy attacks you, it might prompt an assist defend, you know, that sort of stuff. But it's improved on here since there is more variety of assists in this game compared to Atelier Meruru, such as there being more character specific assists like Checkmate and Rage Fang. The special gauge is also here in this game and pretty much work the same way as Atelier Meruru, where you keep doing certain actions, the special gauge will fill up, and when the special gauge is filled up, you're able to do a super move. Though do note that the special gauge only appears if your character is in level 30. Though do note that Ayesha don't get a special move. And the skill option is pretty much with the character's special attack that they do during battle. So yeah. Overall, I really like the combat system of Atelier Ayesha. The pacing of combat is pretty good, as I never felt it dragged out. The assist bar is improved, with the game providing even more variation of assists in this game, which really adds to the combat system, especially with how assist variance depends on positioning, and how the game emphasis on positioning overall in this game really makes it more in-depth and more fun than Atelier Meruru combat system. And the characters that you can use in battle are pretty different from each other as well. And another nice touch I like, well, besides character specific special attacks, well, special moves, getting their own unique themes and animations when finishing the last opponent off, like Meruru, which I have to say, still really feels satisfying, is that the music actually changes if your party is winning. Well, for boss battles. Though I do have one nitpick with the combat, and that's not really got to do with how the combat itself works, since I really have fun with the combat system. It's more that I wish there were more bosses in this game. Actually, no, that's not quite it, because there are probably as many bosses in Ayesha as Meruru. I just wish that it was spread out more from beginning to end rather than most of what I call actual bosses in the game just at the end of the game when you're trying to finish off character quest. But even with the nitpick, I still found the combat system to be pretty fun. Next thing I go into is the alchemy system of Atelier Ayesha, which is what the Atelier games is really strong at. In order to do alchemy in the game, you need to get recipes which you can get from various books that are sold throughout different towns in the game. Oh, this is Atelier, which is the library dungeon. Once you acquire the alchemy book, you just need the ingredients which you can get from gathering from various locations on the world map. Taking note what type of ingredient you put in will determine how they work and what kind of traits you can put in. Okay, now this is where the alchemy system kinda differs from the other games. For one, most ingredients you gather won't have unique properties or conditions if they're the same item. Secondly, you can't get weapon and armor through alchemy, you have to get them via enemy drops. But you can use whetstone and dyes in order to power up your weapon and armor. Thirdly, there's a few new mechanics in this alchemy system. The first is the stockyard mechanic, which can determine if the next ingredient will have a boost in element, quality, score, etc., which is determined by the previous ingredient you put in, which means that the order of ingredient you put in will matter in this game. And then there's the bonus mechanic, which basically determines if the item you're making will get more traits or not, determined by the ingredients you put in. But the traits that you get is determined by the item you're making, and not the ingredients themselves. And there's the alchemy skills as well, which can be used to increase the score of your material, what kind of extra traits you put in your item, etc., which uses CP. And CP is basically the meter that will determine if your ingredient will affect the synthesis. If you have 0, then the next item you put in won't really affect the synthesis. Overall, the alchemy system is great. It's overall simple to use once you get down to mechanics, and there is great depth to the system as well, especially with how the order of the ingredient can affect the synthesis. If there was a problem, it is that the game doesn't really explain the new mechanics well. Well, and also, it is a bit annoying how you have to get weapon and armor from enemy drops now. That and trait transferring is more of a pain in this game, since you need to level up a bit to get the alchemy skills. But it's a good thing that the alchemy skills actually transfer to your new game plus. But anyway, besides those issues, and I was able to get through those issues pretty quickly once I get to it, I really enjoyed the alchemy system of Atelier Ayesha just as much as Meruru, even more so in some regards. Lengthwise, it took me about 22 hours to do a playthrough of the game, but do note that this game does have replay value with multiple endings. Also note that there are a few slowdowns when you go into town. Well, just one town, Rosenberg. Overall, the gameplay is really fun. The game structure isn't probably as open and rewarding as Meruru, but I still feel it's pretty good. The combat is probably the best of the Atelier PS3 games, and the alchemy system is tons of fun. I do probably think Atelier Meruru is better gameplay wise because of how that game was structured, with developing the land and development points compared to Ayesha system, but I still had tons of fun playing through Atelier Ayesha. Overall, I found playing Atelier Ayesha to be a very fun experience. I found the story to be the best in the Atelier PS3 games, the characters to be enjoyable, the visuals appealing, the music being awesome, and the gameplay to be very fun to play around. And I have to add, I can't believe I forgot to say this in the presentation part of my review, that I found the world of Atelier Ayesha to be interesting. Well, more so than the Atelier Arland games, which means I'm really looking forward to seeing more games set in this universe. Presentation wise, it's probably the best in the PS3 Atelier games for me. Gameplay wise, it kinda falls short in comparison to Atelier Meruru due to how it's structured in comparison, but I still found the game plenty of fun to play through. Atelier Ayesha, or the traditional Atelier games in general, aren't games for everyone. But if you're trying to find a game to relax in, then this game might fit the bill.
I can't go easy on you any longer. This is my final move. Taste it! And go to sleep. Farewell.